Your Royal Highnesses, Prime Minister Solberg, ladies and gentlemen. It is such a privilege and pleasure to speak about education in Norway. And I'm saying this because there's so much the world can learn from Norway's success to make lifelong learning a reality for all. But there are also important lessons Norway can learn from the world, particularly when it comes to school education. And let me be frank, if you consider the investment Norway makes in schools and the wages it pays its citizens, there's a lot more that you can and should expect from Norway's schools. But before we get into this, let me start with a glimpse into the past. From our PIAC survey, you see here the skills of the older generation. And you can see only the United Kingdom and the United States are ahead of Norway. Skills of the older generation are great. When you look at Korea, it trails very, very far behind. But the world has changed. If you look at the young generation, this is where Koreans are today, and you can see the level of progress they have achieved over 2 generations is just stunning. You look at Spain, also low performance among the older ones, better among the younger ones. Finland hasn't always been as great as it is today in the PISA results. You can see the older generation was just so actually behind Norway, moving to the frontier. France, another country with improvements. In Germany, the bar gets already shorter, some intergenerational differences. And then you get to Norway, where the older generation does really well. The younger generation actually trailed slightly behind the OECD average. And you get to the United States, and you get to the United Kingdom, where you can say young people entering a much more demanding labor market today are no better skilled than those people leaving the labor market. Huge changes in the talent pool across countries. Now, there are different ways how you can read this chart. The optimists, we heard some of them this morning, will say, well, yeah, schooling is not that great, but people are picking up what they lack later in life, learning at the workplace, and things like this. The pessimists will say, well, schooling today is no longer as good as it was in the past. And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But wherever it is, imagine if you could combine high level of initial education for young people, for every young person, with the great tradition Norway has in making lifelong learning a reality for all. Where could Norway be? What it would mean for the lives of citizens, for productivity and the economy. So that's what we're trying to do when we look at the results from PISA. Just sort of a few keywords on this. It's not just about Norway, it's about much of the world economy where we measure the quality of education. We did our last assessment in 2012 with over 500,000 of students, and we tested them not simply by asking them to reproduce what they have learned in school. In fact, we want to know whether they can extrapolate from what they know and use their knowledge creatively in novel situations. Why do we do this? Because the knowledge economy no longer pays you for what you know. Google knows everything. The knowledge economy pays you for what you can do with what you know, and that makes a huge difference. And then we collect a lot of data from parents, very important in the equation, principals, teachers, and so on, to get us an understanding of what's behind the success. So just very briefly, I'm sure you have already seen much of this in the media portrayed. What do Norwegians know? And you can line up country on a chart like this. On the green area, you have the countries doing really well, very high levels of skills among the 15-year-old population. Yellow is sort of so-so, and that's where you do find Norway. And then in the red area are the countries with rather poor performance overall. The other dimension you need to consider is equity. You want to equip children from all social backgrounds, immigrants included, with great skills. Some countries you can see actually social background makes a big difference. In other countries, learning outcomes are equitably distributed. We all want to be there where performance is great and equity is good. Nobody wants to be there where performance is poor and there are large social disparities. But we waste too much time to think about, do we want to achieve excellence and accept disparities? Or do we want to focus on equity and accept mediocrity? Because when you actually look at how countries are distributed along this continuum, we actually see it is possible to combine excellence and equity, not to make them as trade-offs. I want to bring one more dimension into this, and this is money. I don't have it for all countries, so only a few ones. And I'll make the dots that you see here proportional to the amount of money that is being spent per student. If money would tell you everything about the quality of schools, you'd find all the large bubbles at the top and all the small bubbles at the bottom. No? That's not what you see. Money explains less than 20% of spending on education. Let's look what's behind that. Countries spend their money very, very differently. One way you can spend your money is to pay teachers well, invest to get the best and brightest into the teaching profession. Some countries do that. The bars go up. In others, the bars go down. They spend less on teachers. You see, Norway is sort of in the middle. Norway's education system is cheaper because you keep students for fewer hours in school. Prices are pushed up, or costs are pushed up, because teachers don't work so hard. And what drives costs also up is that you have very small classes. That's a choice that Norway made. And overall, the bill is quite high for that. If you compare that with your northern neighbor, Finland or Korea, very different cultures, very different countries, but they share something. They invest their resources in the quality of teachers, and they pay for this with larger classes. Very different ways of spending the country. And in fact, when you look at this across countries, you find that most high-performing education systems prioritize the quality of teachers, teaching, over the size of classes. So some people see this kind of chart and they say, well, this is all about culture and context. We don't want to be like the Chinese or Koreans or the Finns. But in fact, this is not about culture and context. A lot of these things have actually changed. Let's have a look at this. If you look at the top of the chart, this was where Shanghai was, and they have moved out of the screen, rapidly improving. Singapore, from good to great as well. But it's not just at the top, and you can see at the low end of the spectrum, this is where Turkey was, this is where Turkey is now. And they not only lifted performance, they also made education more equitable. You can see Germany moving upwards, moving rightwards, giving students better learning chances. You can see Italy moving upwards and rightwards. You can see Poland, many different countries, Portugal. Some not in all right directions, but you can see actually there is significant movement. Actually, the world is no longer divided into rich and well-educated nations and poor and badly educated ones. There is a lot of movement, and this tells us actually that change is possible. So let's look at some of the issues that are behind it. What is education all about? It's the dream of social mobility, that education will allow us to move out of poverty, move education upwards, move children upwards. In some countries, that is actually happening. This is the percentage of children coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, poverty, immigration, all these kind of things, who nevertheless excel. And you can see in many countries, you go to Shanghai in China, 3/4 of the children coming from the poorest families still reach the top. Switzerland, very high as well, in Europe. Then you get to the middle, and you find Norway, despite a quite equitable education systems, not very good in lifting children, using education to lift children out of difficult situations. And then, of course, you can get worse than that. There are a lot of countries where poverty is destiny. But again, we can see that the dream of making social mobility the reality is actually quite possible. Very great differences across countries. And this is not just about poor kids in poor neighborhoods. In Norway, it's actually about many kids in many neighborhoods. And you can see that when you look at the top end of the distribution. This is the share of students demonstrating great talent, excellence in education. And you can see again, some countries, the majority of students reach the highest levels of mathematics performance. It tells us that mathematics is not a matter of talent, but a matter of good teaching and actually hard work. And one of the disturbing signals is actually that in Norway, the top end of the distribution hasn't just remained stable, it's actually slightly dipped. One needs to take that into account. Why does it matter? Let's look at our economies in the European area, measured through occupational patterns by PIAAC scores. What we see is that people with average kind of problem-solving skills have seen actually a loss in employment. We need fewer people who can just operate at the average level. At the low end of the distribution, things have remained quite stable. it looks odd. No? If you have low skills, you keep your job. If you have middle-level skills, you're much greater at risk of sort of losing your job. But the job growth has almost exclusively been at the high end of the skill distribution. People call this the skills bias polarization of our labor markets. Now, this was for long a theory. Now it's a reality. People at the high end of the skill distribution are going to have better and better life prospects. People at the low end pay a greater and greater price for this. You can deal with this through redistribution. You can use taxes to take money away from the rich, give it to the poor, and so on. But that's dealing with the symptoms. The root of these growing disparities are the skills of people. So excellence is really mattering. So what does it take to get there? Well, let me order the kind of things by their impact on outcomes and take into account the economic and also political cost of doing things. We all want to do the kind of things that are important and easy, clear, the quick wins. Nobody wants to do the things that are less important and more expensive. But actually, unfortunately, there are a lot of things that we do in education in that area. We also want to move the agenda forward, things that are important, hard to do. And we can pick up some low-hanging fruits, things that are not so important, but actually easy to do. When you look at this diagram, these are the kind of lessons that we have learned of the kind of things that matter for success in education. I will lead you through these in a bit more detail. It starts with a commitment to universal education and the belief that all children can achieve at high levels of standards. You know, one question that we asked in PISA was, what do you believe makes you successful in mathematics? And many Norwegian students told us, well, it's obvious. It's a matter of talent. You know, if I'm not born as a genius in mathematics, then I better study something else. When we asked that same question for the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Finns, they tell us, you know, if I try hard, if I invest my time and energy, I trust my teachers to support me, and I'm going to be successful. In one case, sort of, I'm not in control. In the other case, the education system is going to help me to succeed if I make a difference. You can see that in the motivation of people. When you look at the interest and engagement, the OECD average, people in Shanghai, China, people in Norway. The Shanghainese not only doing well, they're also engaged and interested in what they do. In Norway, a lot of students tell you, well, yeah, a bit, but not really that much. If you would run a supermarket and not a school, and you'd see every day, you know, from 100 customers, 30 go out without buying anything. And you see this day after day, week after week, year after year. You change your inventory. You do things differently. You try to create a different kind of learning environment. And that's something that we have a hard time in education in many countries. I'm not just talking about Norway here. Who do students blame for failure? If you look to the students in Shanghai, they basically see themselves as the principal actors in the education systems. If you see students in Norway and many other countries too, they say, well, I'm unlucky today. No? Or my teachers didn't do a good job. Or their course was simply too hard, even if the course actually is easier. No? So success is outside my own control. This is what I mean by universal, ambitious standards basically placed squarely on every child. No tolerance for failure, a very important attribute of higher education. It also has to do with gateways, clear and ambitious goals, clear articulation of how good education actually translates into instructional policies and practices, shared and good understanding about this. I'm going to come back to this in just a moment. The hardest part, I put it very much to the left, capacity at the point of delivery. No? Attracting, developing, retaining the best people in the teaching profession. And this is not just a matter of money. Finland is probably the best country in attracting teaching into talent. They're not paying their teachers that much better. They provide career diversity. They allow people to move upwards. And the same is what you can see in Asia. In those education systems, there's not one profession, the same for everyone. But there are many ways to work as a teacher. There is a knowledge-driven environment where teachers keep learning as well. System-wide career development, very important. It has to do with incentives and accountability, and those things are actually easy to do. We have lots of countries that have done those things really quickly. And that is about students. How do you get students to study the right thing for them? Things that are actually hard, but maybe important. For teachers, how do you encourage teachers to make innovations in pedagogy? improving their performance and the performance of others. And this is not just about testing. This is about many dimensions. Coming back to standardization, if you have no shared understanding of what good mathematics is, but you leave every school decide on its own, we can actually see that schools with more autonomy do worse than schools with less autonomy. That surprises many, because we know that school autonomy is something important, something great. The picture looks very different if you have a shared understanding of what good mathematics is. Suddenly you see, in that context, school autonomy is a driver of success. More controversially, you can look at transparency. If school data are not known, school autonomy works against you. In a society where education is transparent, you can actually see school autonomy as a predictor of success. So the combination of those factors is what actually matters. And when you look at a country like Singapore, you can see that they implement this kind of standardized policy in every classroom. They regularly consult with experts. They do teacher mentoring for every teacher. They collect feedback from students, from parents, from other teachers. They use external evaluation. They use internal evaluation. They use a multitude of measures, testing included, to explore how they can do better. When you look at this in Norway, it happens. But it doesn't happen on the kind of predictable basis that I would wish it to happen. I met actually a very intriguing school principal in Singapore last year and asked him how this works. And this is how he explained it to me. Listen to him.
To do that, really we get teachers to work together, to collaborate, and to look at each other's practice in the classroom. I think that is essential and really very critical, because the good teaching practices should not reside within the four walls and be kept to one teacher. And I think there is a lot of sharing that we can have in this school.
What you want to do right now is, okay, think of the Socratic questions. Okay, what do I want to use to further define, clarify? Now, okay, I will go on the internet, I will find any sort of evidence that will help support this statement or refute it.
Professional learning community in schools was started basically to ensure that teachers had a platform to develop their teaching practices. Our main focus actually is to make sure that students learn best. And in order to do that, we have to collaborate. We exchange ideas, we try out, we test, and eventually we check for results. And the intention really is to share ideas to make it better for the students.
You see, this is about lifelong learning for teachers, every day moving upwards, every day moving forwards in a very consistent way. It's about investing resources where they matter most, attracting the most talented teachers to the most challenging classrooms. Again, something that we see consistently in the best performing education system. And it's also about investing resources at the right point in time. Our data show, for example, that in early childhood education, those children that have taken part in early education actually come out a lot better at the age of 15. And there's something strange in Norway, you know. You make higher education fee. No? Universities, people don't have to pay for it. And you have the oil to pay for it. It's a great thing to do. But you make actually people pay for early childhood education, no? Where the returns are actually far greater, particularly the public returns, the benefits to the public. No? And you can actually see the benefits you get from investing in young children are actually very considerably high. No? By the way, Norway is not the only country. That's actually quite typical in Europe still. But there's a lot we can do thinking about where does a kroner actually make most of a difference. Coherence. That's the final point I really want to make. A lot has to do with aligning policies and practices across the entire system, from early childhood education throughout lifelong learning. It's about consistency over time, doing the kind of things that we do today, tomorrow, following them up. The much harder challenge is consistency of implementation. Making sure that those things actually happen in classrooms, and that means bringing teachers along with you. This is something that's hard to impose. And finally, fidelity of implementation. And I've just 1 minute left to wrap up, but I'm not going to do that myself. I asked someone else to do that. One of the persons I actually admire most, and this is Premier Dalton McGuinty, who has transformed, if not revolutionized, Ontario's education systems in Canada. They started out and much lower levels than Norway when we started our measurement. Today, they're one of the best performing education systems in the world. Listen to him, how they have achieved this.
First of all, you need to bring to the task a sense of urgency, a sense that this is a very high priority. Then you need a plan. Then you need to enlist people to your cause, teachers included. And then you need persistence. Well, close to 4 out of 10 Ontario students are immigrants. So we have a student population that is extremely rich in its diversity.
We need to deal with that diversity. And so it's not seen as a barrier, it's seen as an opportunity and a challenge. And I think one of the ways in which we've done that is by ensuring that we provide more supports and more resources in meaningful ways to schools that are more challenged. So we can identify the proportion of children living in poverty in a particular school population. We can identify the proportion of children who come to school without either English or French as their first language. And then we can work with that school and that school district to provide additional resources and to build additional capacity in the teaching staff and in the leadership of those schools and districts to assist them in meeting the needs of those children.
So again, imagine Norway could combine its world leadership in lifelong learning with becoming a world leader in school education. It would be number one in the world. And I have every belief that Norway has the resources and the dispositions to get there. Thank you very much.